Hello, welcome to the Boston Herald podcast. My name is Harold Lapidus, and my very special guest today is Mr. Keith Miles. We met via Twitter a couple years back when we were both planning on going to the Bob Dylan Symposium in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We hung out and had a good time. He has two books. One is about New York, Bob Dylan, The Big Apple, Troubadour Tales of New York, which is coming out this week. And then there's the other one, Bob Dylan London, Troubadour Tales, which came out earlier this year. And that's the one I've read so far. And it's a great, very entertaining read, a little map to, if you're in New York or if you're in London, to explore the various places that Bob Dylan has done something or other of various degrees of importance. As I said, we met via Twitter. He was known as Uncle at the time, and we were connecting as I don't even know how, but just through our love of Bob Dylan. And at one point he said, "Oh, we should meet up when we get to Tulsa." And I said, "Great. Who are you?" Because you're just known as Uncle. And then we made plans to meet. I hit a great speech, I think the second morning in Tulsa, and we hung out at the Woody Guthrie Center a little bit. And so he's also, I don't know if the proprietor is the right word, but there's, when Bob Dylan played the Troubadour back in the early 60s, and this is not the West Coast America Troubadour, but this is the London Troubadour. Keith has been in charge of restoring it to its former glory. So first of all, welcome, Keith. How are you doing?
Hi. Good to speak again.
This is take two, but actually it's take three, actually. So why don't we start by talking a little bit about how you got into Dylan, and then we'll move on from there.
Yes. Me and Bob go back a long way, as they say. I very, very early on, as a young child, I was taken to the Isle of Wight festival by my auntie, but I was way too young to remember any of it. So it was not really until Dylan came back to the shores of England in '78 that I queued overnight with my sister for tickets to go and see him at Earl's Court. And I was that teenager with posters of Bob Dylan on the wall. In fact, one of my posters, which is a very graphic animated picture from the film, the Pennebaker film, one of my posters from my wall is now at the Dylan Room in the Troubadour. And yes, as you say, I'm not, proprietor is putting me a little bit higher up my pay grade at the Troubadour. With my co-author of the Bob Dylan in London book with Jackie Lees, we were both teenage Bob Dylan fans in London, and you know, as Londoners and Bob Dylan fans, we really wanted to explore the wonderful places that Dylan played, Dylan stayed, Dylan caroused in, and we wanted to put them all in a book, which remarkably, with the number of Dylan books that have been, hadn't all been put together before. And not only had it not been put together as a book and as a guide, which was important to us, there was a lot of disinformation, particularly about the first time he was in London. And we wanted to put it straight. We wanted to, even people as wonderfully important to the Dylan story as Robert Shelton had the wrong pubs in his book. We wanted to put that straight because we wanted people to go to these places. We wanted people to become music tourists. And, Jackie and I had bowled up one day to the Troubadour, which is in Earl's Court in London, the original Troubadour, which was set up in 1954 and was so successful here in the late 50s that it was pinched by LA, and they took the idea and the logo and everything back with them. And Jackie and I bowled up one day at the Troubadour expecting to have pictures of Dylan and Hendrix and Paul Simon and other people like that on the wall. all of whom played there at key moments in their career. And there was nothing. There were pictures of the Beatles who'd never played there. So we contacted the owners who, you know, live out in America now, and said, you know, could we put a picture on the wall? And they very kindly came back and said, don't just put a picture on the wall, have a whole room. And we duly did. And we put up posters and information, and there are books, and it's a kind of meeting place for Dylan fans in London, which is exactly what we wanted it to be. And it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. And you know, we were so pleased that our kind of sort of naive, amateurish Dylan stan sort of outlook on life and to writing books was successful. You know, we wanted it to be fun, the writing. We wanted to be, and one of the great accolades I have for the new book is someone has put that it's refreshingly non-academic. Hallelujah. you know, music is fun, and Bob Dylan is fun, and there are so many wonderful books and people that can absolutely tell you the link between, you know, Man Gave Name to All the Animals and King Lear. I don't know, you know, but I can't do that. And also, if I'm really honest, I don't care. You know, in my view, sometimes Gibraltar just rhymes with altar, you know, and that's it. It doesn't need a book. But the thing that really motivated me and motivated Jackie was the stories, the wonderful stories around Dylan. You know, Dylan's led, he hasn't led a wonderful life. He's led about 500 wonderful lives in one. You know, he really has had a full life and musical career, and the people that are around him, you know, I think it's part and parcel of why he's successfully out on the road now at 80 with his new album and with musicians, is because all the way through his career, he's loved music, he's loved musicians, he's loved being around that kind of scene. And they're great tales. You know, we told tales in the first book, and now in the second book that, you know, people just hadn't really looked at and hadn't really researched properly, in my view, which is extraordinary given the number of Bob Dylan books that there are in the world.
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 out there.
There's a few. I'm sitting in a room that, so you can't see the side that's surrounded by Bob Dylan books. And you know, a lot of them are wonderful. You wrote a fabulous book about Bob Dylan, I have to say, you know, and there are some wonderful books. There aren't many better subjects for a book than Bob Dylan. I know I'm biased, but I think there's such a wealth and depth of character and places and everything else around it. And that's if you take out the music and the lyrics and those kind of in-depth analysis. Yeah, Michael Gray, you know, who's a wonderful writer. You know, he's probably said almost all I would want to say about the lyrics, frankly, you know, and he does it so very well. But, you know, there are a lot of books, even in this room, sitting looking at a few of them, that, you know, are pretty awfully pseudo-academic and turgid. And I don't want, you know, I want a fun, easy read, to be honest. You know, and you know, I don't want to get to the end of a sentence and then think, how did that start? You know, you know, it's and you know, I think it's the nature of Bob Dylan being such a literary performer that it kind of lends itself to over analysis and academic. Can you say bullshit in Boston? Yeah, you can say bullshit. You know?
Yeah, it's French. It's okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But it, you know, there is a lot of stuff that is hard to read, and I don't think that, you know, that music and music history should be hard to read.
Well, this ties in with everything you're doing. You're making it a living thing. You're walking in New York. You're walking in London. It's a living thing. You're at the and you say being fun is important. As I said, I'm with you. Like, some of this stuff is people are so serious. And Bob Dylan, while he's serious about his art, he's hilarious as a person. And there's a lot of hidden jokes in his music. But also at the Troubadour, you have bands and people giving talks at the Troubadour.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you say it's very much a living thing. You know, it's you know, we, you know, the Troubadour is as a venue is a part of music history, but it's a living part of music history. You know, they have bands, they have young bands. There's a young artist I can see in the poster behind you who will be there. Not Bob Dylan, but the Robin Hitchcock one. He's appearing there on January the 6th with Emma Swift. You know, and it's wonderful that you have still that kind of vibrancy around what is essentially a living museum of music history. You know, as I say, Bob Dylan first played there in the end of '62, and Jimi Hendrix played there, Paul Simon, all the way through up to Adele and other Bob Dylan cover bands. You know, so it's you know, it's all the Adele fans are going to turn off now. I've said that, but and I do quite like Adele. I just don't. I'm not very good on. I'm not very good on Bob Dylan covers as such. Although, having said that, Emma Swift's album was wonderful.
Yep. And one of the things that you when we spoke last time was you wanted to make sure you had a woman's voice in what you do. You had your co-writer on the first book, and you had Anne Margaret Daniel in the new book. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, to me, I am unfortunately I still fit in that category of old white man, you know. And I say old. I got to the age of 61 without writing a book about Bob Dylan, and now I've written 2 in a year. So I'm catching a few of these up in double quick time. But you know, I'm surrounded by books written by white men about Bob Dylan, and mostly old white men written about Bob Dylan. And the one thing that I think, well, one of the many things that are quite important about Bob Dylan's music is that there is a big feminine influence. You know, women, strong women are an important part of Bob Dylan's life, and not just, you know, in the music and everything. And he has a very diverse fan base, you know, that love his music and love what he's saying in there. And I really did want to have, because I think I've got Performed Literature up there from Betsy Baldwin, which is a wonderful book, but that goes back to kind of the mid 80s or something, or early 90s, I can't remember, but it's a long time. And to have, you know, my friend from university and co-author Jackie Lee's on Bob Dylan in London was important. And when the book was so successful, which was a bit of a surprise to us, the book was so successful, and the publishers said, we'd like to have some more of these Troubadour Tales. You know, Jackie decided quite sanely, I'm not doing any more of this. It's, you know, as I think I said to you before, you know, writing a book is 90% writing. No, sorry, 90% admin and 10% actual writing. You know, so there is not a lot. I sit down, I write something, I type it up, and I send it off, and it becomes a book. You know, there's a lot of admin, and Jackie was having none of it. So, which was fine, but it meant for the New York book, it was quite important to me to go to people like Anne Margaret Daniel for the forward, you know, who is one of the finest Bob Dylan scholars that there is, and to go to some of the people to interview who are kind of a little bit neglected in the story. You know, Scarlett Rivera is not neglected in the story at all, but it was important that she was in there. And I know you've interviewed Scarlett, and she's wonderful, but for that mid-70s point, she's pivotal to the Bob Dylan story. And, you know, that was important to me to have her as a chapter in there and to interview Scarlett. But it was people like Karen Dalton, who was, you know, on the folk scene, but up until now hasn't been really given the recognition for the wonderful performer that she was. And I know now there are documentaries starting to come out, but you know, when I started the book, I was talking to someone who's producing a documentary on Karen Dalton, one that hasn't come out yet. But you know, this is someone who should be up the very front of the story of Dylan in Greenwich Village at that time. And I was lucky to interview Terry Thull, who was Bob Dylan's first manager, and an important person for Dylan to go to, you know, for the cultural, the political, and the artistic and the arts sort of influence, you know, on Dylan. She brought so much of that, and she's still in New York. She's still a very active on the political scene, and he's wonderful, and you know, a very critical person to the Bob Dylan in New York story, and a little bit neglected. You know, just an example of how she's not really sort of given her due place in the story is, you know, the Bob Dylan Encyclopedia, which I'm looking at now, which is a wonderful tome, but it's got 730 pages and hasn't got an entry for Terry Thull. You know, so you know, then
there's always more. It never ends.
It will never end. Well, that's the thing. That's why, you know, I could probably have enticed out the publishers a contract for 137 books in the Troubadour Tales series, because there is so much to say. But you know, it's quite important that I say it in a good, accessible, readable, fun way, and also, you know, the books have a secondary purpose as well. You know, they are a guide. One of the difficulties in, you know, London was okay, and it's that big, and you can put it in your pocket, and it's got a map in the middle, and you can take it around. You know, you can use that map to go around London, and people are starting to do that. We do tours, and people are starting to do that. But the difficulty with New York is, like, it's still got to be that thick. What on earth do you leave out? You know, Bob Dylan and New York should be, you know, the size of that. You know, right. It would be enormous if you put everything in. You know, and the purpose, you know, was to inform and to entertain, but also to guide. So it was pretty important for me that I put a caveat at the front of the book saying that, you know, unfortunately, if I put everything that I could do in about New York, you'd need a wheelbarrow to take it around town. So, but I will still get people on Amazon saying, why haven't you done such and such a place? Why haven't you done this? You know, it's
nothing like the internet for people to complain about something.
Oh, my favorite one on Amazon for the first book was someone who said that the Bob Dylan in London book was fine, but it'd be much better if there was a map. It's the thing in the middle.
Well, it's like when my friend Seth Rogovoy wrote a book, Prophet Mystic Poet, which is about his Jewish roots. And one of the complaints was, why doesn't it talk about Christianity? It's because it's about, that's not what it's about.
I think also there's Peter Mackenzie's got a book out about when Bob Dylan stayed with him with his family in those early days. And again, there is a review on Amazon saying, God, it's all about Bob Dylan sleeping on the sofa and Bob Dylan staying in their house. That is the book. That is literally what the book is, you know.
What's this new Bob Dylan song on all this new Bob Dylan album? Why is he singing Bob Dylan songs? I mean, it's like, people just complain about anything.
I mean, but then, you know, you open the can of Amazon worms, and you know, it's the world comes in. You know,
so obviously it was a lot different writing the book about London than in New York. Do you want to just talk about the different compare contrast how the writing process was?
Yeah, well, completely different. You know, number one, you know, I knew London and I knew the places, and they were part of my life growing up and working, you know, I knew a lot of the pubs like the King and Queen and the Troubadour and Pinder of Wakefield, which is wonderful, you know, and the venues, you know, I'd been to Earl's Court, I'd done all that, you know, I'd lived that book, which is fine. And for me and Jackie, it was a labor of love. You know, it was almost like we needed to get this book out, which they always say is the best way to write a book.
Yeah.
But it was very much like that. And I have to say, you know, because the book went very well and the publishers wanted more Troubadour Tales, I was fine with that. But they said, we'd like you to do New York. And I have to say my heart sank, you know, number one, because there are a lot of books about Bob Dylan in New York. I mean, you can't not have New York in any Bob Dylan book, you know, in essence, you know, because they're synonymous, really. You know, it's very much his spiritual home. But also, you know, it was quite difficult to think how I would fit all that into that guide way. You know, I need the stories, but I'm gonna have to leave a lot of stories out. I'm gonna have to leave a lot of places out. You know, everything is pretty much covered, but it's not a reference book. It's still a storybook, you know. And I always wanted it to be the same. You know, Jackie and I had this format style, if you like, of fun, informative guide, all that sort of thing we wanted in one book. And also to appeal to every Bob Dylan fan, you know, so, you know, to appeal. So there will be something for the likes of your good self, who knows a lot about Bob Dylan, you know, who's pretty hardcore fan, you know, and, you know, hopefully in both books, there'll be a little something you can get from it, but also for someone who knows very little about Bob Dylan, you know, can actually pick the book up and think, this is an interesting guy. This, you know, there's maybe a little bit more to this music, and to explore then further through that. And hopefully, I mean, the first one, it worked for people across the range. Hopefully the second one works the same. The biggest problem and the biggest difference was the pandemic, which meant I couldn't travel. I couldn't go to New York. So, you know, I really did rely very much on Sarah Rabb and Brett Johnson, who were my researchers out in America, who could go to places and interview people. And they set up interviews for me. And they were wonderfully, wonderfully good and conscientious. There's nothing as hardworking and as wonderful as a Bob Dylan fan working on a Bob Dylan project. And they were, I mean, Brett Johnson was wonderful, and he's a wonderful young writer, you know, and Anne Margaret Daniel put me in touch with Brett, and he produced great chapters on, you know, for example, the White Horse Tavern, you know, and he could go there and meet people, and it was fabulous. So I've relied on other people. I've relied on New Yorkers. Dina Regina's written a great chapter on the Music Inn. And as I say, Anne Margaret Daniel was a great deal of help, you know, to have such a great Dylan scholar and New Yorker there was wonderful. So I've been able to put it together without setting foot in New York. Hopefully I've got across the kind of, particularly with the early Greenwich Village scene, you know, I mean, I find it extraordinary how that, and I explored how that scene grew up, and how that happened there. And, you know, I had an endorsement from Stevie Van Zandt from the E Street Band, who said, look, you know, at that particular time in the early 60s, you know, Greenwich Village was the cultural center of the world. And I think he's got it absolutely right, you know. And I always think, well, look, if Dylan had bowled into New York and into Greenwich Village maybe 3 years earlier or 3 years later, life might have been quite different. You know, he's a wonderfully talented individual, but he has that great fortune of timing that I think every artist needs, you know, and he's wonderfully good at getting to somewhere at the right time and then exploiting it to its full. And Greenwich Village at that point, you know, had the most extraordinary, as I mentioned, Karen Dalton, but, you know, you've got, you know, Ramblin' Jack Elliott had you know, set a path really for Dylan, you know, and Peter Lafarge and Dave Van Ronk, you've and the Clancy brothers, you've got a wonderfully creative and diverse scene there. But
also a lot of comedians as well. A lot of the cutting edge comedians back then too were in the village.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that when you look back at Bob Dylan's early time in Greenwich Village, his act was quite funny. He'd play it for laughs, you know. I mean, I think most people have seen the Chaplin-esque sort of pitches in that early stage, but he really did at times play it for laughs. But you know, he was really welcomed into that scene, and you know, whether it's the Greenwich Village mother hens that you had there, and the people that would constantly have him over for Sunday dinner, or let him sleep on the sofa, or you know, bath him and get him a haircut, and you name it, they really did look after him. Number one, because I think he played to that quite well. You know, the waif and stray act, he did pretty well, clearly. But also, I think, as Terry Thull says, you know, pretty much as soon as you'd kind of heard him any time, you realized he was a pretty talented guy, you know, and he was going somewhere. And they kind of appreciated that it was well worth nurturing this guy.
And when we spoke last time, before I forget, early on, you said admin. I assume that's short for administration, right? When you said admin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that it sounds like admin here, and I meant to insert that.
No. So, administration. Yeah.
Most people got it, but in case you didn't. And I believe in the new book you spoke to AJ Weberman.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I had a kind of, you know, as a non-New Yorker but a Bob Dylan fan, I had a kind of wish list of people that were still with us that I wanted to speak to, and it was people like Terry Thull. It was definitely people like Scarlett Rivera, but number one on my list, you know, and I you know, we are entering the pantomime season, and very much AJ Weberman is always the pantomime villain, and I couldn't imagine a book called Bob Dylan in New York, essentially, that didn't at least try to talk to AJ Weberman. You know, I think there's a key. It's the most important dramatic story in this. You know, it's so wonderfully weird and Dylan, the whole episode and everything during that time. And I thought, well, look, I've got to try to talk to this guy because, you know, he is important to the story. And again, the joys of Dylan Twitter, you know, I thought, how do I find this guy? How do I, you know, and I was kind of naively thinking, you know, it would be quite difficult. And someone on Twitter said, well, look, I'll just send him a note. And he sent a note back saying, give us your number, I'll give you a ring. And it was as simple as that. And I spent 2 hours talking to AJ Weberman. And I did think, well, look, I'm going to ask him everything I want to ask him, but that means he might put the phone down on me. And, you know, he's still wonderfully out there. He's still crazy as a bag of spanners, you know, but he says, I'm still a Bob Dylan fan. I mean, he's all of us taking it to extreme. It's like, you know, we all obsess about Bob Dylan and have different ideas and things. It's like, it's kind of gone too far with everything, I think, bless him. But excuse me.
It's always good to know. It's always good to know someone who's more into it than you are to make you seem like you're not into it enough.
Yeah. We need him. We need him there, so we're not there. You know. You know. It's. And I asked him, so you know, what sort of regrets he had, and you know, he did say, "Look, I'm really sorry that I, you know, knocked on Sarah's door when the family were there and stuff like that." You know, he doesn't regret scuffling with Dylan in the street and things like that. But he's very yeah, he is regretful of some of the things he's done. But as he says, you know, Dylan said to him, look, you know, my album was sitting on the shelves until you came along, and now I can't sell enough of them, you know. So you know, he's a key part of this story. And I think I'm so pleased that everyone pretty much that I wanted for the story is in there. And you know, I think they're the stories and the individuals and the characters that give it that sort of New York life, that New York sort of vibe, really. You know, as a city, and you could kind of tell. You know, it is vaguely chronological. You know, it's not a biography by any manner of means, but it is vaguely chronological. And you can see why Dylan goes back time and time again. You know, right from the start, you know, from when he arrived in Greenwich Village, it was the lively music scene that he wanted. And he does come back time and time again to New York. You know, the book begins and ends at the Beacon, you know, and lo and behold, at the age of 80, he's just finished the mini residency there, you know. Extraordinary. And that will remain. They are very much, you know, synonymous, I think, Dylan and New York.
And so what is, you have a 6-book deal, you said? For
no, I have a 4-book deal.
Oh, 4 books. So what are the other 2 books that you're planning? Have you figured out what the next one is? Are you started on it at all?
Yeah, no. I'm going to do with. I was fascinated by still a guide, and still the same format, but I was fascinated by the parallels that there were with Dylan and Dylan Thomas. And I'm going to explore that with a Dylan Thomas expert, and that I find fascinating because that brings in people that are important to Bob Dylan that I personally want to explore. You know, Arthur Rimbaud, I think, is a extraordinary character. You know, and again, you know, you've got the tales in London where, you know, Verlaine and Rimbaud sort of lived, and you know, extraordinary things like the original fish fight that was then replicated in Monty Python with Verlaine and Rimbaud, you know, so they would slap each other with haddock in the street, you know. I love stuff like that, you know, and they were important to Bob Dylan. These are very important influences. And you know, Dylan Thomas, I mean, you know, he obviously followed in his footsteps a sort of fair bit, but you know, again, they were kind of both the original and archetypal rock and roll poets, frankly. You know, that's where this parallel sort of comes through. So that is going to be the next one. And then I'm hoping to tackle Japan, because I find Japan and Dylan quite an extraordinary love affair. And I've already spoken to some extraordinary Japanese performers out of the folk scene there. You know, there's a lot. Like I say, I could do another 167 Troubadour Tales books, I'm sure, you know, on various aspects of Bob Dylan and as guides. There's just a lot of material really there in the characters and the places.
And so before I let you go, I wanted to get your take on the Bob Dylan Symposium, which we both attended back in 2019. Looking back on it, what are your thoughts?
It's an extraordinary time. I like, you know, I couldn't, and this came before the Bob Dylan in London book had come out, and I'd written my paper just on Bob Dylan and Robert Graves, which again I found fascinating. You know, and again I'd like to do a little bit more on, because I do think it's you know, a pretty important aspect of Dylan's early career was that meeting with Robert Graves and what it meant. But you know, going out to Tulsa and going to see the archive and to look at the typed lyrics, and to actually sort of see that was extraordinary moment. And it's wonderful that that's been brought together. But probably more important than that was a gathering of, I don't know, was it 500 sort of Dylan
500
fans?
people, I think. Yeah,
which is extraordinary. It was wonderful, 500 people that that you can talk sensibly about Bob Dylan with, and aren't going to say, but he can't sing, or is he still alive, or stuff like that. Which is our everyday lives. But it was wonderful, and like your good self and Anne Margaret Daniel and so many people that I met at that particular time, that I still in touch with. Dylan Twitter I enjoy. Twitter's a wonderful thing. You as long as you nicely sort of keep your own little room to what you're interested in. And don't venture into the politics room or the football room or something like that, but stay in the Dylan room, stay there. Is wonderful. And I cannot get over how much people know about Dylan stuff. I sit there in shock and awe when I read Scott Warmoth stuff and things like that. And I think, oh, Lord, these people are so smart and so incisive,
Dag Brathen is, I don't know if that's Dag, as I pronounce, Dag Brathen. Yeah, he's another one. This is another go-to guy.
He kind of knows everything. It's like, you'd say, well, God, you'd make a comment about Bob Dylan wearing an interesting vest there, and it goes, vest from this store in such and such,
And of course, there's also a Harry Hugh with focusing on stuff that no one else focuses on. Oh,
Harry's wonderful. Harry's fabulous. But yeah, that's the other thing, is that it was important to me to keep a kind of female voice in the book and in Dylan writing. Mm-hmm. But the other thing, and the next thing is not the gender side of it, it's the age side. I want people like Harry, and kind of everyone's younger than me, but I want younger people to be coming through with the kind of new breath of fresh air look at Dylan stuff. Because, as I say, I'm looking at books now that I say that's the very old and turgid and, like I say, pseudo-academic. And there are great new books going to come through from younger Dylan fans, I'm sure. They will eventually come away from the keyboard and Twitter and come to the keyboard and a publisher, and there will be wonderful stuff. Harry, I would read 167 of Harry's books, frankly.
All right, so the new book, the New York book, comes out this week, right?
Comes out Thursday. Yeah, it comes out on Amazon. It comes out on the UK one, amazon.co.uk, and on UK bookshops. But it can be bought from any kind of bookshop. But the publishers tell me a certain number of books are sent over to America to then go out. I don't know where there must be a warehouse of books on hold for someone to want them.
Yes, I know. I don't know if Barnes and Noble will do this in particular, but you're going to go to Barnes and Noble or a smaller store probably, and if you're at an indie bookstore, try that first. But yeah, you could just request it, and they can figure out how to get you a copy.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it won't be too bad. I mean, since the self-inflicted wound of Brexit over here, it's been really hard to get anything in and out, and there are pretty expensive processes half the time. But I think it should be okay. I know that the Bob Dylan magazine ISIS have got I know they've got a number of signed copies because I signed them, obviously. That's how it works, I reckon. They've got a certain number of books. If you go on the ISIS website, be careful how you type that in, though. And then erase your browser history. But then you can go on there and you can, I think it was only, they put on there, it was only like $19 to get a signed copy shipped. Mm-hmm. So like, which seems pretty good for the shipping as well, you know? Yeah. So I know some people have tried that and say they've ordered it. So, you know, I think you can get it there. Or I think if people have got Amazon Prime, you can go into Amazon Prime and then log in on the amazon.co.uk and then it will send it. But I think that adds, I mean, it will come up to, you know, it's over here, it's at the moment, it's £10. So it's, I don't know, the price.
Well, it's a bargain at any price, I would say.
It's like, come on, if that's not a stocking filler, I don't know what is. Come on.
My, the guy I went to see Dylan in Boston with, I think he bought a beer for $20. So, and how long does that last?
Exactly. You definitely won't get a beer in the Whitehorse Tavern for less than that. You know, it's not a bad price, and you know, hopefully if you add the postage, it doesn't come up to too much. But I think if people want to try their local bookshops, that's great, and I suppose get a quote from them on what it would be to get it shipped. But if not, try through the Amazon Prime or the ISIS website. As I say, that if that really is $19.99 to actually get it shipped out as well, then that's pretty good. And I think it was like $16.99 for the rest of the world, so Europe and, you know, that sort of way. So it doesn't seem too bad to me.
Yeah. And apparently there are Troubadour T-shirts. And yeah. So and how do you get one of those?
They're on it's called Dead Posh is the T-shirt company, and they're pretty decent T-shirts, I have to say. And they're also going to be because one of the chapters I have, which I was pleased to get through the publishers, was on the Dylan and the Plugs tale. So the Letterman show in '84, which I love more than almost any other Bob Dylan tale, you know, and I love that band, you know, Bob Dylan in front of millions of people on telly with basically a pub band, you know, what's not to love? And the whole story is in there. And as I think I said to you before, you know, I even have a comment from the man who put the harmonica out. So, you know, the story, but there are going to be, I hope, special Dylan and the Plugs T-shirts, which will go out, which and I've got an artist, Kate Green, who's done those, and she did the Badlands record for Springtime in New York, so they'll look pretty good. And I would imagine that's going to be a go-to present for most Dylan fans, I would hope. But,
do you want to go into a little? You want to go into, because you told me this last time, but you want to go a little bit into detail about talking to the guy, because maybe some people don't know what you're talking about with the harmonica at Letterman.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did. I mean, Harmonica Gate beautifully, but you know, it wasn't just that Dylan appeared with this basically sort of post-punk pub band essentially. But and also they were awesome. The performances are wonderful. People should check them out on YouTube. You know, it's an extraordinary performance. But partway through Jokerman, Dylan goes for his harmonica break, and it's a harmonica in the wrong key. And and I timed this. It's just over a minute of primetime TV with Bob looking for his harmonica and the Plugs, dare one say, plugging away and, you know, and playing beautifully and thinking life is what is going on here, you know. And it's the most, I think, probably the most dramatic live TV moment after the moon landings. And it's a wonderful Dylan moment. But the I traced and there's a comment from the guy who was supposed to put the right harmonica out, and you know, eventually Dylan comes back and he's got the right one, But the irony of all ironies is that the Plugs waited for the call to go on tour, which never happened. But the guy who put the wrong harmonica out went on tour with Dylan. So there's no justice in this world. It really isn't.
Yeah, if that's not a Dylan song, I don't know what is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Keith. It's always great talking to you. You're at his Twitter name is Barberville, at Barberville, and I will. He's on. I don't know if you're on any other social media. Are you on Facebook?
Oh, I can't do Facebook.
Good for you. I'll do it for you, and so you don't have to. But the links and everything. There's a blog that is associated with this video, and I will. All the links that are necessary will be in there, and so the book's coming out Thursday, and I will get this up before then, hopefully, and I can get it afterwards. But it'd be a nice Christmas present. Too late for Hanukkah, but my birthday's coming up too. But that's another story. But anyway, so
okay. Something in the post to you, Harold. Don't worry.
All right. So good luck with the book. Good luck with everything. Lovely. Stay healthy. Hello to everybody out there in jolly old England, and I will stay in touch. And good luck with the book.
Lovely. Hopefully, see you soon at the Troubadour. We need that. Yeah. We need that.
Yeah. If they ever let me in, I'd love to go. I'm not in the Troubadour, but into the country.
Lovely. Thank you, Harold.
And also Tulsa, hopefully, if everything's safe enough.
Tulsa again. We'll do that. Lovely. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.